the American Revolution and the author of 8 books. So please, after, feel free to come over and take a look at his books. He does have them for sale. Great.
Hello, everybody. Can you guys all hear me okay?
Yep. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. This is my second time here. I had a wonderful experience the first time, and I was glad to get the call to come back. And hopefully we can do it again. You know, without power outages and tornadoes. We missed out on that one. It still is raining. So we're going to talk tonight about the American Revolution in Western Pennsylvania. And I have been very fortunate. I've been delivering this lecture really all over the East Coast. We get to, kind of tell everyone the secrets we already all know, how great Pittsburgh is. I get to be the ambassador for Western PA, so I'm happy to share it with you. The American Revolution in the West is not like the revolution that we're mostly celebrating now in the 250th anniversary. The revolution we're celebrating now is a war of armies and fifes and drums and continental congresses and things like that. The American Revolution in the West is very different. And notice I say the West. And people don't get this everywhere, but in Pittsburgh here, we were the first West. So this wouldn't play well in Nevada or Utah, but before they were there, we were the West. It's a very different war here, and to understand kind of the events that happen here, we have to go through some basics. So if you'll permit me, we'll jump ahead and take a look. What I have on the screen here is a wonderful map of all of the major battles of the Western frontier in the American Revolution.
I was just getting up
Now,
to go turn on lights.
what is the Revolution of the West?
It's
How
like
do we treat it as historians? We don't treat it well. For the most part, we ignore it. And this would be, in my opinion, paramount, tantamount to studying World War II and only studying the European theater and ignoring the Pacific completely. Any one of us would laugh at that idea. But we do that exact thing to the American Revolution in the West. So the Revolution in the West is messy, it's partisan, it's filled with ethnic violence between settlers and Native Americans. It's an Indian war here in the West. But really, it's best understood between two major centers of power. So the first is going to be the British center of power at Fort Detroit. This is where the British commanders will operate out of. This is where they'll execute and plan their campaigns. That's the British center of the West. The American center of the West is one that's much closer to home for us, is right here in Pittsburgh. That's Fort Pitt. So if you want to think of it that way, Fort Detroit and Fort Pitt, jockeying for control of everything in the middle, that's really what's going to be the American Revolution in the West, writ large. Now, the British don't have any really big armies out here at all. What they have are mostly American loyalists who live on the frontier. But there's not many of them. The vast majority of their military force is going to be British, Allied, Native American warriors that side with that. That's going to be most of the people that are fighting. And on that same token, we don't have much of a military force out here either for the Americans. Most of our fighters are not guys in uniforms, not really at all in fact, but they're what we call frontier rangers. These are people that are parts of communities and neighborhoods. They're farmers and blacksmiths and cobblers and teachers, and then when trouble comes, they fight. And that's a good way to think of it. It's a militia force. Very much, I think, like a volunteer fire department. Fitting for where we are, right? Very much like a volunteer fire department. When duty calls, you're on. But you still have your life to live, and that's how it looks. Fort Pitt, that's what we'll focus on mostly tonight. We can jump ahead here. Let's see if that's the one. Here we go. Is very important to this story because Fort Pitt is the western headquarters of the Continental Army. So we know, of course, the Continental Army in the East, George Washington and Horatio Gates and Nathaniel Greene and the Brandywine and you know, Battle of Brooklyn and all these things. The western headquarters of the Continental Army is Fort Pitt. And Fort Pitt was really in control of all the small forts around this area as well. So this is where the action was for George Washington's army. And he was in regular communication, by the way, with the people in charge out here. And as we'll see, that's going to be a revolving door because life is miserable out here in the West. Why Fort Pitt? Well, Fort Pitt was founded after the fall of Fort Duquesne in 1758. This is the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War. I have a book about Fort Pitt. It'll tell this whole story in more detail. But Fort Pitt will effectively be completed the way you see it there by 1761. Okay? It becomes Britain's premier fortification of the western frontier. I don't think there's any question about that. And it becomes a launching point for many of Great Britain's western expansion initiatives before the Revolution. So we are going to see Fort Pitt besieged and attacked by by an alliance of native warriors in something we call Pontiac's Rebellion in 1763. It was attacked because it was important. In 1774, just 2 years before the Revolution begins, we'll see an event by the colony of Virginia called Lord Dunmore's War. It was an attack against the Shawnees. Virginia claimed Fort Pitt as its own, as well as all of southwestern PA. So that's where that's going to come in. And there's going to be major tensions in this area between the colonies of Virginia and Pennsylvania. The governor of Virginia, all the way up to 1776, claimed southwestern PA as Virginia. He even renamed Fort Pitt into Fort Dunmore. He was Lord Dunmore. So he called it, you know, in a humble sense after himself. For the Virginians kind of dominated the city of Pittsburgh. But the Pennsylvanians wanted to claim it too. And they began arresting each other and getting into open skirmishes, fistfights, and very terrible. And we were almost on the verge of a colonial civil war between Pennsylvania and Virginia until the Revolution broke out. The Revolution's what ended that intercolonial conflict. So what's important for us is Fort Pitt's always in the middle. As I mentioned, by 1777, we're going to see Fort Pitt as the biggest and most important fort in the West, named as headquarters for the Continental Army. There's a couple reasons for that, and number one was most important, was the Ohio River. The Ohio River was the gateway to the West. It was a super highway into the frontier. Everybody wanted it. Britain and France fought for it in the 1750s and 60s. You bet the British and the Americans will be struggling to control it in the American Revolution as well. You don't want to climb over those mountains. You want to take the easy way west. And remember, the Ohio River takes you to the Mississippi. And once you hit the Mississippi, you can go south to New Orleans, or you could go north to the Missouri River. And that will take you all the way to Yellowstone. So when we say the Ohio River is the key to the continent, that's very much what they believed. Fort Pitt controlled all of the fortifications, not only in the Ohio River Valley, but that extended down to, of course, what is today West Virginia, Kentucky, and Illinois as well. So very important place. The other reason it was so important for George Washington's army was that it was really had a quality about it that not many places had here on the frontier, which is that it was accessible. So how is it accessible? Well, that comes out of the 7 Years' War. There we go. 2 roads go to Pittsburgh, and that's what makes it so important. One of them you see in blue, built in 1758. This is the road all the Pennsylvanians use, out of Carlisle, and Philadelphia via Carlisle. It's called the Forbes Road, built by John Forbes in 1758. This is the expedition that ultimately caught Fort Duquesne. Remember, the Continental Army and the Continental Congress and the nucleus of our government's in Philadelphia. So it makes sense you want to have a road like that here in the West. But the other way comes out of Virginia. And this was built in 1755 by General Braddock, Major General Edward Braddock.
Excuse
Yes.
If you turn the lights off, you can probably see the map.
Yeah, can we get, if you guys are okay with lights, they're filming, so I'm fine with it if they want to.
You can try, but
Yeah, they're filming.
They're filming.
So I'm fine, no one needs to see me, they just need to hear me. Although she did say I was good looking earlier. That's the first time that ever happened, okay. Like, anyway, so what you have here is all the Virginians are coming up the Red Trail, the Braddock Road, all the Pennsylvanians are coming across the Blue Road, the Forbes Road. If you're gonna have a place in the West that's gonna be the nerve center of your war, Fort Pitt is it. It's accessible, again, via roadway, and it, most importantly, is on the Ohio River. So hopefully that lays kind of the groundwork for us, why Fort Pitt's so important and why it's chosen. In January of 1778, the American Revolution is still pretty young. The Continental Congress is still trying to accrue allies. Let me ask you guys this question. I'll throw you out an easy one. How many colonies were there at the beginning in North America, at the beginning of the Revolution? We always hear that, right? 13 colonies. Anyone disagree? Yeah, you should. There's 16 colonies. Okay, what am I talking about? Well, Quebec, which was all of Canada, was a British colony, and Florida, which was 2 colonies, East and West Florida. So we actually had 16 colonies, and they were invited to come to the Continental Congress, and they didn't come. And they had reasons for that. In Canada, the British allowed them to be Catholic. That made them happy. They were fine with that. They were all controlling French. In the Florida's such a nightmare. Mosquito-infested swampland. All of their food and supplies came from Britain on ships. Those settlers didn't want to risk losing that. If they join the rebellion, they're cut off. They're not growing their own food yet down there. The alligators are waiting for them. So those other 3 colonies don't show up. So what do we tell kids? Well, the 13 colonies. Because if we told them there were 16, but only 13 showed up, then they start asking questions. Why didn't the other 3 come? Don't worry about that. Right? It makes things messy. Remember, as historians, we love the mess. We all dive into it. It's not black and white, it's gray. That's where you'll find us, that gray area. But at any rate, by 78, the Continental Congress has not given up on getting maybe at least one, if not both, of those Florida colonies, East Florida and West Florida, to their side. East Florida is what we think of mostly as Florida proper today. West Florida is basically the Gulf Coast. The northern panhandle of Florida, as well as Mississippi and Alabama. So what the Continental Congress says is we got to get West Florida on our side, because they control, very importantly, the outlet of the Mississippi River. Let me show you that. There it is. So here's the Mississippi, here's the colony of West Florida. If we could get them to be American allies, we could access the world via the Mississippi. So that's really important. So how are you going to launch an expedition down there? Well, of course, they go to Fort Pitt. And there's a captain in the Continental Navy, and that's not saying much, because our Navy was not much to speak of. And his name was Willing. Willing is going to be told, take a group of men out of Fort Pitt, take them down the Ohio River, and then go down the Mississippi River. And what you want to do as you go down the Mississippi is you want to recruit allies. There's a bunch of farmers, plantations, all along the banks of the Mississippi. So they tell Willing, take some men, recruit them to our side, and turn the colony in our favor. So what's Willing going to do? Well, here's he and his men loading up, getting ready for their expedition. They leave Pittsburgh in January of 78. They hit the Mississippi River, and they see all these amazing, luxurious, wealthy plantations, British plantations, people we want on our side. So Willing and his men raid them. They steal from them, they take food, they take enslaved people, they attack the settlements, they get in firefights with these settlers. They're supposed to be making friends, that's their mission. And they're attacking everybody. So needless to say, this is not going to work. Willing's raid, as we call it, is a disaster. He writes back to the Continental Congress sort of what happens. He gets to New Orleans, he'll be arrested by the British, they're waiting for him down there. This couldn't have gone worse based on what he was supposed to do. But it's kind of one of these initial forays into the revolution for us that we see out of Fort Pitt. It's a total disaster in terms of recruiting British allies, and they earned that. But it does help to secure the Spanish to our side, which is an added bonus. The Spanish have very little interest in working with the British. This is Spanish territory here, one side of the Mississippi, the western bank. This is British territory. They're not going to be allies anyway with the British, but they do come to our side as a result of this. So Willings Raid's important, and it's the first time we're going to see really the Fort Pitt on the scene in the Revolution. And again, if you've got some questions, please wait till the end so we can hit all the high notes. All right, so next we're going to see a commandant take over Fort Pitt, a new commandant. His name is Edward Hand, and you see him there. And Edward Hand is a loyal Continental officer from Georgia. He's actually born overseas in the old world, right in Europe, but he comes here to America, he settles in Georgia. He's fought alongside George Washington all the way through the war to this point, 78. He was with him at Long Island in New York, the Miracle there, White Plains, Princeton, New Jersey, right, Christmas Eve, crossing the Delaware. Washington knows and trusts Edward Hand. Edward Hand will become a brigadier general in the Continental Army. And then he says, after all that fighting, I want to go home for a bit, back to Georgia. But when he gets down there, he gets sucked back into Georgia politics. There's a signer of the Declaration of Independence there called Button Gwinnett. These two guys are old rivals, they hate each other. They challenge one another to a duel. Edward Hand wins the duel and murders Button Gwinnett, who signed the Declaration of Independence. So needless to say, people want to see him swinging for this. Washington doesn't want to lose his general, so he recalls Edward Hand to the north, and he gets him in Valley Forge. And he tells Hand, listen, these guys want to kill you. They want to hang you for shooting and killing Button Gwinnett. That would be a terrible fate to be executed. I can do you one just a little better. I'm going to send you to Pittsburgh. That's how he saves Edward Hand. He puts him in command of Fort Pitt. Now, we all know the stories about Valley Forge, how terrible it was. Oh, they didn't have food, they didn't have shoes, they didn't have money or gunpowder or lead, and that was all true. I mean, it was a terrible time, that winter in Valley Forge. That's like every day here in the West. They never had any of that stuff. They were wretched, starving, forgotten, sort of Western fringe elements of the Continental Army. So while, Valley Forge is tough, that's like more or less like just a Tuesday here in Pittsburgh. So Edward Hand will arrive in Pittsburgh in June of 1777, and who's in Fort Pitt? Not many people. He finds 2 companies of 13th Virginia, and that's all. And they're hungry, and they're undersupplied, and they're maxed out, and they're ready to leave. And that's life in the West. And Edward Hand is now a commandant of Fort Pitt and the commander of all forces in the West. Okay, by the time we get to, again, 1778, we see Willings Raid occur. Hand and his men realize they got to do something. It's a lot of sitting around at Fort Pitt. Hand wants to be busy. He wants to contribute. How's he going to do it? Well, he's going to actually receive word that British allied native warriors are being supplied with weapons right near the Cuyahoga River. Cuyahoga River, very famously, caught on fire, right? The fire's been burning ever since. We call them the Cleveland Browns. That's Cleveland, right? So right near Cleveland, the Cuyahoga River's there. And the British are keeping weapons there and supplying British allied warriors. And these are the warriors that are attacking the frontier, right? Unsettling things. So Edward Hand says we should launch an expedition right when 1778 turns to march out of Pittsburgh here into what we'll call today northeast Ohio. And we should find those weapons, take them for ourselves. We need them too. And most importantly, the natives can't use them against us. Now this is January, February. This is not a time you want to be out marching. But Hand sees his men sitting idle, and he thinks now's the time to do it. Okay. Here we go. Hand and his men begin their march toward the Cuyahoga River. This will be a big deal because it's really the first time that the Continental Army crosses the Ohio River into Western territory. Remember, Pittsburgh's on the lower bank of the Ohio. They're going to cross over here for the first time. Most of the men that go on this campaign are rangers, volunteer rangers from Westmoreland County. The weather's terrible. Again, this is February of 1778. And you know what that weather's like. It's rainy, sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's cold, sometimes it snows, sometimes it rains. It's very terrible. Hand will take his men from Pittsburgh northward. They're going to approach what is today the Pennsylvania and Ohio border. Obviously, you have to cross that. And they're going to head up the Beaver River. So they go up the Ohio River to about what is today Beaver, Pennsylvania. And they head up the Beaver River here. And the idea is they'll jump on the Mahoning, which will take you pretty close to the Cuyahoga. They don't connect, but it's pretty close. As they get there, the weather turns. The men are starving, the men are angry. There's nobody in sight. There's no native peoples, there's no Europeans or British or anyone around. They're starting to get antsy. But here's a good look at where they get. They will stop about 40 miles short of the Cuyahoga River, right here. Okay. As they're turning around to go home, some of their men go out as scouts, and they say, we found those natives. We know where they are. We found a whole village of them. And Edward Hand says, okay, let's attack them. His men want a fight. They've been sitting around for months. They're looking for a fight. So they hear that there's a village. Sun comes up. He tells his men, midday, go ahead and attack this native village. What they find is not what Edward Hand was told would be there. So I'm going to go ahead and read you this quote. Hand writes, to my great mortification, we found one man with some women and children. The men were so impetuous that I could not prevent them from killing the man and one of the women. Another woman was taken and with difficulty saved. The remainder escaped. They found the village of just like one family. That's what that's not who they were campaigning against. They literally attacked the only Indians they could find. As it turns out, they were parts of the Lenape Nation, the Delaware Nation, who at this point are neutral, leaning toward being our allies. That is not going to help things. Historically, this happens right near what is today Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Historically, this event's called the Squaw Campaign. And that's what the soldiers call it, because that's the only people they killed, was women and children. It is a disaster, and that's like your first welcome to the West, because it's not going to get any better than this. This is it in 1778. Edward Hand will be relieved of duty, obviously, from this. What a military disaster this was. And a new commander will come in named Lackland McIntosh. When Lackland McIntosh arrives in the summer of 1778, he shores up the relationship with the Delaware, and he signs the treaty, what's called the Treaty of Fort Pitt, in the summer of 1778. Summer of 1778. The story I told about, Georgia, the killing of the that was actually McIntosh that did that. It wasn't Hand. Hand's from Lancaster. But at any rate, so you just got to switch those stories. And this is where McIntosh comes in. But at any rate, McIntosh will sign the Treaty of Fort Pitt with the Delaware in 1778. It's a really big deal because it's the first treaty we signed ever as a country with an Indian nation. And obviously, we're going to have a lot of these moving forward. The Treaty of Fort Pitt, 1778, is the one. Okay, what do they say in 1778? In 1778, here's what the Treaty of Fort Pitt says, amongst other things. Promises made to both sides. The Delaware promise to be immediate American allies. Okay, what do they get? Well, what they get in exchange is the Americans to build a fort in Delaware territory. That fort will be on the northern bank of the Ohio River, right in what is today Beaver, Pennsylvania. Again, the Ohio was the divider between native land and American land. Now, when the Americans built a fort, Lackland McIntosh will name it after himself. It's called Fort McIntosh. This is a really big deal for both sides because the Americans now get a foothold in Indian territory. That gets them a little closer, not much, but a little closer to attacking Fort Detroit. And for the natives, this is a huge deal because forts bring trade, supplies, weapons, food, all the things they want too. So that's like the equivalent of building a Walmart in the middle of nowhere. They now have access to those goods. Okay, the third tenet of the Treaty of Fort Pitt, 1778, is the Continental Army is allowed to march through Delaware territory to strike Fort Detroit. And that's very big. So what's neat about the Treaty of Fort Pitt, both sides get something they really need. Americans are desperate for native allies. Desperate for native allies. So everybody wins there at Fort Pitt. Okay, Fort McIntosh is right here. This will be a fortification on the northern bank of the Ohio River, today Beaver, Pennsylvania. And Fort McIntosh is gone, but it's still a great historic site for you to visit. And again, this is the first fort we ever built in native territory, the northern bank of the Ohio River. What's important about it, though, is that it's not just a fort or the only fort, but it's just the beginning of several forts. Because what Lackland McIntosh wants to do is build multiple fortifications from east to west to allow us to inch closer and closer to Fort Detroit. I'll show you this on the map. All right, so here we go. Here's Pittsburgh. Right up the Ohio is Fort McIntosh. A colonel named Daniel Broadhead out of Fort Pitt will build a road from Pittsburgh to Fort McIntosh. We call it the Broadhead Road. It was an overland route. It's still there today. If you're familiar with Boone Township in DeBeaver County, Broadhead Road, that's it. It's virtually unchanged. I did a YouTube video. I drove the whole thing, where to go, where to turn. Just Google my name or Broadhead Road and you'll find it. It's about an hour long. But, it's the original route, which is pretty neat. That road connects Pittsburgh to Fort McIntosh. They next have to go 80 more miles to Fort Lawrence, which is right there. And Fort Lawrence will be built fairly deep into Indian territory, but that was part of the arrangement they made with the Treaty of Fort Pitt. And the hope is that can be a further springboard for an attack on Detroit. That will never happen. Fort Lawrence is tiny. Lackland McIntosh, remember, he's from Georgia. He names that after one of his allies and heroes, Henry Lawrence, in the Continental Congress. So he's also Southern. So that's why there's a fort named after a Southerner here in Ohio. Fort Lawrence will be the only Continental Army fortification built in the state of Ohio. And he'll build that in 1779. So again, there's a road that connects the two of them. I've already made a video tracing this route. I'd love to make the remainder of the video, maybe this summer. Maybe if I have time, I don't know. But at some point, I think I'll do that. And again, Fort Lawrence is a historic site today. There it is. That's what you're going to see. Not much. I mean, it's a drive. That's what you're going to see. But there it is. So Fort Lawrence is like a dream that never materialized. It was a promising idea of building a military road, and we've done that before. But the problem is, native warriors led by a man named Simon Girty sniffed it out right away. Have you guys heard of Simon Girty? Simon Girty was a British colonist, Pennsylvanian, taken captive in 1756. I have a book about this. An attack on a place called Fort Granville. He was raised amongst the Indians. They called him the White Savage. He fought valiantly against Americans on the British side. So Girty will lead the charge on this. He tells British administrators in Detroit, hey, the Americans have a fort out here in the middle of nowhere, and I think we can take it. Can we attack it? And the British say, go for it. So Fort Lawrence will be besieged. It's undersupplied. Again, there is a military road from Fort Pitt to Fort McIntosh, 80 miles to Fort Lawrence in Ohio, but it's cut off. That means no food gets through. No supplies, no medicine, no nothing. Those men are left hung out to dry. And the entire mission ends in a failure. So again, if you're keeping score, we've had two major campaigns. They've both been total disasters in the West. This is the reality of studying this time period, right? Very difficult. Very difficult. One of the other things about Fort Lawrence, which I think is really interesting, remember Pennsylvanians and Virginians both claimed Fort Pitt. They both claimed Pittsburgh. The Pennsylvania commander, Daniel Brodhead, and the Virginia commander, a man named Gibson, were constantly fighting. They were threatening to arrest each other. It was a mess, pulling rank on each other. So McIntosh puts Gibson, the Virginia commander, in charge here at Fort Lawrence. And he leaves Brodhead to Pennsylvania and Fort Pitt. Because if these guys can't get along, just separate them. That's the idea. So that's what he does. But this, too, will end in disaster. Okay. After the Battle of Monmouth in 1778, the war here in the West, Monmouth is in New Jersey, takes a major turn. I was warned about this. Let's see. There we go. Okay, it takes a major turn. George Washington is absolutely sick of trying to chase footprints in the snow, chasing native warriors around the western frontier. He says, we're not going to deal with this anymore. We're not going to chase them anymore. We're going to take the war to them. And he launches a three-pronged attack into New York State, in the dead of winter, into the heart of Iroquois territory. The Iroquois, 4 of the 6 nations, were sided with the British. So Washington orders 3 forces to march into New York State with a singular mission, which is search and destroy. Search and destroy. If you find a cornfield, if you find a village, if you find a supply of food, destroy it. Burn them out, right? Take the war to the Indians. John Sullivan will lead a force up the Susquehanna River in the middle of Pennsylvania. He'll march into New York State that way. Brigadier General James Clinton will march from Albany westward. He'll burn and destroy that way. And a third component will be led by the Pennsylvania commander, Daniel Brodhead, out of Fort Pitt. He'll march up the Allegheny River and burn and destroy all the villages he finds there. This is total war. This is complete annihilation of Indian country. Washington, after 3 years of fighting native warriors in the Revolution, and frankly, he's been fighting them since 1754, has had enough of it. And it's a major change because it's going on the offensive rather than the defensive. It's becoming proactive instead of reactive. But there's Daniel Brodhead there. Daniel Brodhead is an interesting guy, Pennsylvania to the core. He was with Washington at Battle Forge. Washington writes in this letter, from my opinion of your abilities, your former acquaintances with the back country, that's us, and the knowledge you must have acquired upon this last tour of duty, I have appointed you to the command in preference to a stranger who would not have time to gain the necessary information between that of assuming his command and the commencement of operations. What he's saying to Brodhead is, I know you know Western Pennsylvania. I know you know the Ohio country, as we're called. That's why you're in command. Okay. On August 11th, Brodhead will accrue about 700 men from the 8th Pennsylvania and the 9th Virginia, and they will leave Fort Pitt and head directly up the Allegheny River. And they go right through the areas where I grew up. New Kensington, Freeport, Ford City, Kittanning, just following the Allegheny River northward. Their target is going to be roughly the area today of Warren, Pennsylvania, which is way up north. Because there's a native village there called Buckaloon, and they think, okay, that's going to be the place we want to first attack and destroy. Now, as they move up the Allegheny River, again, these natives, they are very aware of this campaign. They're abandoning their villages. We had little villages all over the Allegheny River Valley. So as they're marching, they're finding abandoned villages. And Brodhead and his men burn them all. They just destroy them until they get to their target of, again, Buckaloons today, Warren, Pennsylvania. So here you see the Sullivan and Clinton campaigns. Here you see Brodhead's campaign. Every one of these little markers here is one of the native villages that's burned. Buckaloons is right up here. As they approach northward on the Allegheny River, right near what is today Tionesta, you guys are familiar with that area? Very beautiful green area. It really hasn't changed much. His men are stretched out, 700 men in a long, thin line, kind of snaking up the Allegheny River. And from the front of the line, they encounter some Iroquois Seneca warriors. Now those Seneca are not out looking for a fight, they're out hunting. It's a hunting party of a dozen or so men. But those Seneca warriors bump into Brodhead's men, they engage in a firefight. Brodhead's men will take cover on an island in the middle of the Allegheny River called Thompson's Island. This will be called the Battle of Thompson's Island. And it's one of the only Revolutionary War battles in western Pennsylvania. And we have a few, but it's one of the ones that's often overlooked or forgotten. We don't know a lot about what happened at Thompson's Island. I'm going to share with you two accounts that we do have. One from a captain named Matthew Jack, who was in the front of the line. Brodhead was in the back. So by the time he got up there, the fighting was over. He says, they stood but one or two fires. We killed 12 of them, and the rest ran. He also added that 4 or 5 of our men were killed or wounded. A militiaman named Jesse Ellis out of Pittsburgh, he said the fight lasted hotly, severely, about 10 minutes. And that's it. So again, this isn't like, the Battle of Saratoga or something. But it's a battle that happened here in western PA. It's important that we know about it. There's a look at Thompson's Island today. In my estimation, it hasn't changed at all since 1779. I think it's exactly the same. If you were to get there, just follow State Route 62 northward. You'll see a blue PHMC marker. Look to your left, and you'll see the island. And that's, save you the drive maybe, but that's what it looks like when you're up there. Okay, Brodhead will return from his march on September 14th. Remember, they left in August. They did their part to burn and destroy everything. The biggest villages they destroyed, Buckaloons, Conawago, Yakrunwago, and I never try to pronounce this fourth one, but they destroyed. They'll actually head west toward Meadville. This is probably where they get, and then they head back south. When they reached these northern villages, they said they encountered stalks of corn, think about this, that were 12 feet tall. September, corn's grown 12 feet tall. And they take what they can because people in Pittsburgh are starving. From one village, they'll bring back over $30,000 worth of supplies. He says they raided 500 acres of corn. They took cattle for beef, 30 horses, 30 brass kettles, just from one singular village that they destroyed. So this is part of George Washington's real push into native territory. Take the war to them. The destruction is enormous and massive. The Iroquois Confederacy will never recover from this. Their ancestral homeland is burned and destroyed by these 3 total campaigns. They're effectively taken out of the war at that point, which was what Washington's goal was. Okay, 1781, big celebration, Battle of Yorktown. The American Revolution in the East is over, and people out west are still fighting native warriors every day. And they're like, oh wow, the war's over, good for you. I have to go fight now. Because the reality is, the war will continue here in the West for another 3 years. At least 2.5. And the worst of the fighting hasn't even happened yet. So while everybody's celebrating the world turned upside down in Yorktown, oh, the fighting's done. It's not even close to getting done out here. It's still in the worst yet to come. Because in 1782, we call this the Year of Blood. In 1782, British commanders in Fort Detroit see the writing on the wall. We're probably going to lose this war. And they'll tell the native warriors that are with them, just go wild. Attack, destroy, take captives, do whatever you want. Bring captives to Detroit, we'll even pay you for them. Wreak havoc. And 82 is the most violent, brutal year of the war here in the West. If you're familiar with Daniel Boone, this is when his sort of revolutionary story kicks in, right? The Battle of the Blue Lakes down in Kentucky. This is 1782. I have a YouTube project I'm working on called Robinson Run. If you haven't seen it, it's available on YouTube now. This is when Robinson Run, which is about 3 miles that way, is raided and completely destroyed. It's all part of a much bigger cycle. But 1782 is a bad one. For frontier settlers, in 1781, they write letters, passionate letters to the Continental Congress. Send us supplies, send us help. If you don't send us something, we may not make it, right? Something terrible may happen, and man, were they right. All over western PA, native warriors burn and destroy every settlement that they could find. Catastrophic results in 1782. Again, here's Fort Detroit. Everything you see in this realm becomes a greater war zone than it ever was before. The amount of captives taken to Detroit, we will probably never have a good count for them. It was definitely in the high hundreds, close to 1,000 captives at least. The war raged western Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Ohio, West Virginia, Illinois, and St. Louis just were a complete disaster of partisan warfare and ethnic violence. Violence does begin violence. And again, this is going to be difficult to talk about for the next several slides, so if you're squeamish, just be prepared. I am still going to talk about it, but we're not doing ourselves any favors by ignoring it. So there's enough history whitewashed everywhere else. We don't have to do it here. A group of Scots-Irish settlers at a place called Vance's Fort, which is today right around Burgettstown, Pennsylvania. Okay? Decide that they've had enough of native peoples attacking them and not being able to fight back, not having the supplies to fight back. They say, we're going to launch our own offensive. They don't ask for permission to do this. It's a completely local decision. They will cross over into what is today the state of Ohio under the command of a man named David Williamson, and they will attack the first native peoples they can find. And the first native peoples they find are a peaceful village of Christianized Delawares and a German settlement called Janatahood. And the Janatahood Moravian natives have no idea this is coming. Williamson and his men completely brutalize and annihilate them. They behead the women and children, they chop their hands and feet off, they burn them alive, they beat them to death with clubs. War is hell. People always want to throw around the word savage, I never do. Because I would say war is savage. People aren't savage, war is savage. Find me a war that wasn't. But here, there's no innocence left on the frontier. And the Janatahood massacre stands as the single worst moment of uncontrolled violence committed by either side in this war. But again, this is retaliation, so it's where it comes from. As a result of that, in late May of 1782, out of Fort Pitt, Colonel William Crawford will be given a mission. And it will be to march into Ohio to find a prominent native village and destroy it. Okay? He's joined by mostly Pennsylvanians. He will launch a force out of Fort Pitt. As he moves westward, native warriors are very well aware this attack is coming. They want revenge for the innocent people that were just killed at Janatahood. They were all women, children, and elderly people. They view the Americans now as the extremists, the savages, whatever you want to call it. This is the war of the West. Crawford and his men will be targeting the villages at Upper Sandusky. So here's Fort Pitt, there's Mingo Bottom, this is today West Virginia, Ohio, in the Ohio River Valley. They're going to march to what's called Old Sandusky here and attack there. The reality is they'll never get there. Crawford and his men will be engaged in a firefight en route. They'll be taken captive, and here you can see Colonel Crawford tied to a post and made to pay for the sins of the men from Fort Vance and the torture and murder of those Moravian Indians at Janatahood. I'm going to give you the full account of what they did to Crawford. It's unbelievable. But again, you'll find plenty of places where history will be hidden from you or tucked away or changed for your feelings. I'm not a person that does that. Okay, this happened. They wrote it down for a reason, and the reason was so we knew about it. So Colonel Crawford will be taken hostage, he'll be taken captive, and this is his fate. This is a direct quotation. Crawford was stripped naked and beaten. His hands were tied behind his back, and a rope was tied from his hands to a post in the ground. A large fire was lit about 6 or 7 yards from the pole. Native men shot charges of gunpowder into his body. So this is not shooting rounds of ammunition, just an explosive burst to burn him. Then they cut off his ears. Crawford was poked with burning pieces of wood from the fire, and hot coals were thrown at him, which he was compelled to walk on. Crawford begged Simon Girty to shoot him, because Girty's, again, a white man raised by the natives, so he was hoping he'd be an ally but Gertie replied that he could not interfere. After 2 to 4 hours of torture, Crawford fell down unconscious. He was scalped, and the woman poured hot coals over his head, which revived him. He began to walk around insensibly as the torture continued. After he finally died, his body was completely eviscerated. There's nothing I could ever talk about in the Revolution like Crawford's demise. We talked about Independence Hall. We talked about crossing the Delaware. It's a whole different war out here, right? Very much. But this is actually one of the really important moments in American history that's often overlooked because it's so horrifically brutal, but very on par for the course of the War in the West. Okay. Shortly after this, the city of Hannistown in Westmoreland County, this was kind of the base of operations for Pennsylvanians in the West, in July of 1782, will be attacked and completely burned and destroyed. Hannistown was a very big deal. The Virginians lived in Pittsburgh, the Pennsylvanians lived in Hannistown. There was a courthouse in Hannistown. It was the capital of Westmoreland County. In July of 1782, the entire village was destroyed by both British Allied native warriors and American loyalists. So, where does this all lead? September 3rd, of course, we have 1783, the end of the American Revolution, the Treaty of Paris is signed. America is now free. The British will tell Native peoples, okay, the war's over. You can stop fighting now. And they'll say, well, you know, you guys can go home. Where could we go? So what's going to happen is the Native War continues in 1784 and 1785 here in western Pennsylvania. George Washington is elected president, 1789, right? 1788, he becomes president, 1789. This war continues. It's a multi-generational war. It's the same war from the 1750s, from the French and Indian War. Just new generations after generations inheriting it and fighting it. Ultimately, in what is America's first war, we call it the Northwest War, Washington will send a campaign under the command of a man named Anthony Wayne to march into the state of Ohio, to what is today Toledo, so the far western corner. They'll engage these warriors in a battle called the Battle of Fallen Timbers. That's 1794. In 1795, the older chieftains of these nations have to sign a peace treaty called the Treaty of Greenville. And what that peace treaty says is that on January 1st, 1796, when the sun comes up, all native peoples have to be out of the Ohio country forever. We don't care where you go, but you can't stay here. And when the sun comes up, they do. They have to go to Indiana and Illinois. And for the first time in thousands of years, there's really no native peoples left in western Pennsylvania. So that's the kind of the long story of the American Revolution here in the West. It's not an easy story. It's not a light story, but it's important. You know, yesterday was Memorial Day. These men, these women fought, and they fought hard for an American dream they believed in. And they should be, you know, memorialized and remembered just like everybody else. So not easy to talk about, but someone's going to talk about it. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Okay. Thank you very much. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.